Hello everyone. In today's video I'll be talking about my collection of grey boxes. Yes, grey boxes, I'm serious. But this is the wrong side. It's these grey boxes that I'm talking about. Because I want to show off my NES collection. This was my first NES. Not the original grey box, but the 2016 grey box. And that feels weird to say, because how can this thing possibly be 10 years old already? I got mine brand new around the time you could still get them in stores and they were cheap. It was a gift from my grandmother. Pretty soon I decided that I needed an extension cable because look at this. If I take this controller and take it up to my shoulder, the console starts to lift. That's how short the cable is. And of course a second controller. But I haven't used this thing in years after getting the original, so let's turn it on. Well, this is certainly annoying. After a bit of troubleshooting, I found out that this thing would not turn on because the USB cable that I'm pretty sure it came with didn't work anymore. But trying with another one, I got it to turn on. But that wasn't all my problems, because now both controllers, neither the one that came with it or the secondary one here, neither of them work. I've cleaned the controller input and that didn't help either, so I don't really know what to do. But the last game that was played on here was Ninja Gaiden, so let's make that our first game that we play on the actual NES.
And here it is. Mine says Shadow Warriors because for some reason the game needed a different name in Europe. This game I've always found to be really difficult, mostly because of the controls and the weird collisions. And also in general it's just NES hard, as they say. Double Dragon 2, however, is a much more fun game in my opinion, and it's quite similar. This one is a beat 'em up, 1 or 2 player. It has an interesting control scheme, but you can definitely work it out pretty quick. It reminds me a lot of the Streets of Rage series on the Sega machines, which is only a good thing.
You've probably heard about the different regions in retro games. There's PAL for Europe, NTSC for North America and Japan, and so on. But for some reason, Nintendo decided that the PAL NES should be divided in two. Mine is PAL B, which is for most of Europe, while I think it's the UK and Italy where they used PAL A. This means that my Double Dragon here, which is PAL A, needs this adapter in order to work properly.
I have 3 games which need this adapter. This is Double Dragon 2, which is the UK version, then the USA version of Mickey Mouse Capade, and a UK version of something called Turbo Racing. And speaking of racing games, I have 4 of them. There is Excitebike, Mark Rider, Rad Racer, and Turbo Racing. While I do really love racing games, I don't think that 8 and 16-bit games with a viewpoint like the one here in Mark Rider has aged really that good. Which is why my favorite racing game on this console is this X-Rental game. It's even a 5-screw variant, which means it's really early, and it's Excitebike. Unlike racing games, puzzle games typically work really well on these old consoles, especially the NES because it has a really good D-pad. But I won't bore you with Tetris because we've all seen that before. Rather, I want to talk a bit about Dr. Mario, which is one of my favorite puzzle games of all time. I was first introduced to it when I got my first retro console, this blue Game Boy Pocket, in the summer of 2019. And ever since then I have been really in love with this game and have it on multiple consoles, including the NES, Game Boy and the Super Nintendo. There's another great puzzle game that I own that is nowhere near as famous but is still really good. It's called Kickle Cubicle. In this game you continue this little white guy who I guess is called Kickle. He can turn these blue guys into cubes, which I guess are the cubicles. So let's kickle some cubicles. And then you are supposed to go around and collect all sorts of stuff, like this money bag that I'm for some reason not collecting in this clip. The game has many different levels and worlds, so luckily it has infinite continues, so you can just keep going. But before I keep going with this video, it's time for a commercial break.
Game Genie! Attach it to most of your video games. Go to any level. Live forever. Game Genie, the radical video game enhancer.
The Game Genie here works pretty similar to how the game converter from before works. You find a game, put it in like this, and into the console. Then you take a page out of the Game Genie's book, quite literally because mine is falling apart, and find a code. With this code, the pills never fall by themselves. The game's not paused. But when I press down, it goes down. So the game becomes really easy. Even with this cheat, level 20 here, which has a lot of germs, took me about 10 minutes. But I could never beat it without the cheat. Every Game Gear back in the day came with a codebook like this, with a big list of all the current games and some codes for each of them. But using the power of the internet, you can find codes for pretty much any game.
Friend Brent Rambo.
But my favorite NES accessory has got to be this. He's dead. Like any self-respecting NES owner, I have Duck Hunt. But also a few of the less famous Zapper games. They're pretty great too, and always a big hit whenever I'm showing someone the NES. But the best thing about the Zapper for me is that it just works every time. I feel like other light guns are really sensitive to contrast or brightness if that's not turned in just right on the TV. But this one just works. Next game I want to talk about here is called Devil World, which is a really interesting one because this was Shigeru Miyamoto, the guy behind Mario, Zelda and Donkey Kong. It was his very first console game because everything he made prior was made for the arcades only and then later ported to consoles. So let's play it. Devil World is often said to be a copy of Pac-Man, but I don't think that is true. A game set in a maze, that's just very common in the early 80s. That's not necessarily because it is a copy of Pac-Man. The game consists of just 2 levels and then a bonus stage in between them, which is not a lot, but it varies because every time you go through it, it gets a little more difficult with tougher enemies and faster scrolling. The next genre I want to talk about is platformers, because there sure are a lot of those on the NES, and the first one here is Asterix. Depending on where you're from, you might not know who this is, but Asterix is I believe, French comic book character that is very popular all across Europe, but not really outside of the continent. Other than the comic books, there is of course video games, as you see right here, and some movies. Personally, I grew up with the Asterix movies and not really the rest of the stuff. Another one of my platformer games here is Bucky O'Hare, which I got really cheap because it's the German version and it's kind of sun-faded on the label. It's also a very difficult game. It's unforgiving right from the start with enemies and bullets everywhere. Back in the day, Disney games was surprisingly good, and that is no exception for Chip 'n Dale Rescue Rangers, both number 1 and 2, which I both have. I love how the level designs aren't really generic like most others, but you really feel like you're a small chipmunk running around in some sort of landscape. It's also a great two-player game. And probably the most important games in any NES collection, the Mario trilogy. My personal favorite here is Super Mario Bros. 3. I believe this was also the very first NES game that I tried outside of emulation. And that was an overview of my NES collection. I didn't get around to every single game, which you have right here if you're curious, but I did get around to everything that was important to me, including the Game Genie, the very nice condition complete console, some complete games too, and also the NES Classic, which I was kind of sad to see didn't work anymore, but at least I have the original. For the rest of this video I will leave you with me playing Super Mario Bros. 3 because that was the last game I showed, and I'll play until I lose a life. So let's see how long that is. If you're not interested in that, you can just click off right now.